Wherefore, Series 3, Episode 31. A baby beaver is born in Devon for the first time in centuries. A little while later, another baby beaver is born in Norfolk. No one really knows where these beavers have come from. There are people who claim to know and think it was a deliberate reintroduction. And there are people who claim to know and say it was an epic crossing from France. Here theories diverge as to whether the beavers swam or whether they built rafts and paddled them. If anyone was going to excel at raft making, it would obviously be beavers. The third theory is that in the right conditions, beavers simply emerge from the beaver seam. We live in an era of alternative facts, conspiracy theories, and post-truth cultures. There are some people who believe that truths and facts still exist, are solid, definite things whether people see them or not. What exactly is the relationship between truth and the human mind? Does reality create consciousness? Or is it the case that consciousness creates reality? If the latter, then what happens when we no longer have consensus reality? There are people for whom the breakdown of consensus reality is more than just an issue of opinion, and for whom the increasing fragmentation of human thinking looks a lot like disintegration on a much larger scale. How many alternative facts can reality stretch to accommodate? Are we going mad, or are we driving reality mad? Or both? These are the questions that currently keep me awake at night. Back to the beavers. Wigstan is convinced that the beavers have emerged from the beaver seam, and he is an expert to be reckoned with. He is, as I understand it, trying to create the right conditions for a beaver emergence in Stroud. I have to wonder whether Neris's partial beaver state began as something relating to the beaver seam. Whatever this force is, it exists beyond my perceptions, and as a narrator I must remain awkwardly vague about where it is that beavers really come from. Back at the beginning of all this, I made a lot more effort to try and show up like a proper narrator. It helped in some ways that I was a pretty awkward entity at that point. Following people round and peering into their heads worked for me. I was the supernatural stalker, looking over the shoulders of assorted people who seemed willing and able to move their own story along. I wander back and forth between failing at being an omnipresent third-person narrator, as with the beaver seam issue. I'm just not omnipresent enough to pull that off, and being an overtly self-conscious first-person narrator. Unlike your traditional literary first-person narrator, I know I'm here, and not in a way that means I'm going to get into some weird-ass conflict with the author. Looking back, it all changed because of beavers, being asked to get involved with Neris's predicament. I slid awkwardly from narrator to active participant. Somewhere along the line it occurred to me that I didn't necessarily have to observe everything from an unobtrusive distance. I could talk to people and ask them what they thought about things. I could be in the story, as well as just telling it. This way is less lonely. Sometimes I actually get more done. Other times I end up distracted in amusing ways. I've never really had to explain myself to Wigstan. He's blessed with a remarkable willingness to just accept weird entities as they are, be that badger shaman, predatory bushes, fairy rhubarb spirits, semi-corporeal giants, or whatever it is this week. Wigstan takes everything in his stride. He doesn't seem to feel too constrained by being narrated or by the impact on his reality that might be caused specifically by being narrated by me. When I tell a story, I can end up fixing ambiguous threads into definite patterns. I could, for example, just decide where it is that beavers come from, and thereafter that would be true. This makes me uneasy about the unravelling of reality, because I could be doing more to decide which truths are true and which fake truths are getting things back on a firmer basis. I mean, this would be a massive responsibility, and I'm not really qualified to define truth in many of the areas in which it is breaking down. Would we be better off with my best guess at truth? Or do we limp on with conflicting truths and alternate facts until someone with a better grip on reality is able to get it all under control? I don't know. I procrastinate. There's also the issue that with the beaver scene, we're getting back into the rich vein of animal whimsy that makes it impossible to get any sort of arts funding for this project. Wigstan tells me that the answer is time travel, and that if we went back to the 1970s, this would be no kind of problem at all. The work-to-outcome ratio may be problematic. I can look back at time, no trouble at all. Sometimes I can look forward with reasonable degrees of success. Being there for long enough to do paperwork is an entirely different matter. It may be fair to say that the Wizard Wigstan is, at least sometimes, the sort of chap to deal with a problem by finding an entirely different problem instead, as with his current enthusiasm for politicians depicted as naked biros. He's one of those rare people who can study the anthropology of conspiracy theory groups, dirty light workers, and other such strange assemblies, and come away largely unscathed. I find his research unsettling, often. I am left uneasy after having been alerted to the existence of a David Icke dating agency. Presumably for all the many people who either want to date David Icke and who want to date people who want to date David Icke. It's a cult, Wigstan tells me. I know what happens next. Come and stare at pictures of David Icke and you can be cured of all eels. I imagine eels are also worried about this.